Hello and welcome. The US says it's offering carrots. Kenya says it's seeing sticks. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice was in Nairobi yesterday offering friendship and substantial American assistance for reconstruction if the main players in the conflict agree to share power. Well, Kenya's politicians are not convinced and feel the US is trying to beat them into submission. Dr. Rice's visit, lasting a total of 6 hours, came on the back of an African tour by US President George W. Bush, where he declared the only way forward for Kenya was a power-sharing scenario. The opposition leader, Raila Odinga, is ready to join the government as Prime Minister, taking up the country's domestic concerns. He would leave the military and head of state functions to his rival, President Mwai Kibaki. But Mr. Kibaki argues that this is an unconstitutional and unworkable compromise. The Kenyan foreign minister took it a step further, saying, "Our friends should not make the mistake of putting a gun to anybody's head." More than 1,000 Kenyans have been killed and over 600,000 driven from their homes in the violence following December's contested election. On today's program, we examine the political crisis in Kenya, which is changing the perceptions of the country. Now, don't forget, we take your calls on this show, and you can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Well, joining us on the phone from Nairobi is Kenya's Foreign Minister, Moses Wetangula. Also from there is the former Minister of Planning, Anyang' Nyong'o. Professor Nyong'o is currently the Secretary General for the opposition Orange Democratic Movement. And here in Washington, we get a US perspective from the former Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, Herman Cohen. He currently lectures on Africa policy at Johns Hopkins University. I welcome you all in, gentlemen. And I'd like to start with Minister Wetangula, actually, in Nairobi. And sir, ask you, what prospect do you see right now for some sort of power-sharing agreement with the opposition ODM? I know that Mr. Odinga has said he would consider it from a Prime Minister's perspective, but I gather Mr. Kibaki is not too keen on that idea.
Well, the dialogue process is still ongoing, and I happen to be one of those delegated by the President to be part of the dialogue team. We have several issues on the table, and today we were tackling the issue of governance, which includes the arrangement within a restructured government to include the ODM, and we are discussing that.
Well, Mr. Wetangula, if I can ask you an email question we got in from Lulu Al-Quresh that came in on the internet. It says, it would be nice if Kibaki agrees to share power in order to end the violence. That way we can avoid sending in the UN or British as if it were Baghdad. Now, I wonder, at this stage it seems discussions are ongoing, but could you see any situation arising where UN or foreign troop intervention would be necessary in Kenya?
I do not envisage any situation whatsoever under which any UN or any other troops, for that matter, would be brought into the country, because we are committed as a leadership to resolve the problem, and we are going to resolve the problem.
Okay, so let me get across to Professor Nyong'o, who's joining us from Nairobi as well. And it seems, Professor, it seems that Mr. Odinga has taken some steps towards reconciliation by willing to accept Mr. Kibaki as President of Kenya. I wonder, from your perspective, the ODM party perspective and Mr. Odinga's perspective, what is the minimum he would take in terms of compromise from the President to have a power-sharing agreement?
Well, we think a power-sharing agreement is a fantastic arrangement to get out of the crisis, and I'm glad to hear from my colleague, Minister Wetangula, that they are engaged in constructive discussions to ensure that this power-sharing formula works. Of course, we originally had said that Mr. Kibaki stole the vote and he should step down for Honorable Raila Odinga to take over, but we moved from that so that the country can move forward. And the power-sharing formula, I think, is a win-win situation.
We have a caller on the line from Nigeria. Pius, if I could ask you for your question, please.
Thank you. I want to make some a little comment concerning African leaders.
Yes.
You know, it is very terrible for people that is not elected to take control of the government. It is very unfortunate that an old man who his people do not want any longer should stay in power. Many people lose their lives, a lot of them. If your people told you they don't need you any longer, for the sake of the masses, for the sake of peace, for the sake of the unity, he should step down.
All right, Pius. Well, I'm going to go ask Ambassador Herman Cohn, who's joined us here. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And it's good to have you.
Welcome.
You know, you're very familiar with Africa as a continent. I know you know many of the countries, and the comment here from Pius touches on this fact that leadership, at least leadership quality, seems to be lacking in some places. When you look at the situation in Kenya, how surprised are you at the way things have ended up?
I'm not surprised. It's very difficult for people who are incumbents to really be willing to give up power, and especially in a very, very close election. I can understand why certain interest groups would say, no, we must stay in power for the good of the country needs us. But in the case of Kenya, I'd like to point out that in the parliamentary election, which was very, very certified to be totally honest, the ruling party had a major loss. Many of the ministers in President Kibaki's cabinet were voted out. They lost their seats. That was sending a strong signal from the Kenyan people that they really wanted change.
You know, I have to ask, I just bring Professor Nyong'o back on again for a moment and ask an email question we got from Paula Valley in the UK. And Paula says both the President and ODM are responsible for what has happened. So much misery and devastation has taken place. Was it worth such an awful price? And I wonder, when you look, Sarah, at all the killing that is going on, what could, for example, Mr. Odinga do right now to at least send a message out to his supporters that this isn't the way? How could he send a message out that would at least stop some of the killing?
Well, it is not really correct to say that both Mr. Odinga and Mr. Kibaki are responsible for the killing. No. If the election had not been stolen, there would have been no problem in Kenya whatsoever. Kenyan people voted very responsibly on the 27th of December. They expected the Electoral Commission of Kenya to do its responsibility and return the verdict to the people who had voted. The ECK let the people of Kenya down, and Kibaki refused to concede that he had lost the elections. That is what caused the problem in Kenya. And then eventually, rather than try and calm the situation, the police came out very brutally against the people in Kisumu, in Nairobi, in Eldoret, everywhere. So I do think that the responsibility of the insecurity in the country must be given to the person responsible for maintaining security in the country, the fellow who stole the elections and the fellow who still controls the security forces in this country.
I should point out, Professor, I wasn't saying specifically it was Mr. Odinga who was responsible. I just was wondering if there was a message he could send out. But let me bring in Minister Butangula again and ask, when it comes to the visit by Dr. Rice from the USA, how does Mr. Kibaki regard the US efforts to mediate? How is that message from Condoleezza Rice being received?
Well, Dr. Rice came to Kenya yesterday and had meetings with the President, Honorable Raila Odinga, and Dr. Kofi Annan. She said that America supports the mediation process that is going on. This is something many others have said before, and it is something that Kenyans are already committed to, because that's why we are sitting with Kofi Annan to discuss the problems of the country. But let me also point out to Professor Nyong'o that continuing to use words like stolen elections is what is precipitating problems in this country, because we have agreed that we stop using such language that inflame people's minds, because President Kibaki didn't declare himself a winner. He was declared a winner by the Electoral Commission. Why the ODM should continue labeling him as an election thief is something I don't understand. And Dr. Cohen, too, has made an extremely incorrect statement by talking about the loss of ministers. This is not the first time ministers have lost elections. In the last election of 2002, the then Vice President Musalia Mudavadi lost elections. This time, the Vice President Mudi Awori lost elections. It has no bearing on what the presidential vote looks like at all.
All right, let's get Ambassador Cohen's view on that response, but also, well, go ahead. Let's get your view on that.
Well, I think it does send a signal that people are dissatisfied when they vote out ministers of a government. But of course, I didn't comment on the actual presidential election. All sorts of experts have said that it was so close that they really didn't know the result, and the head of the Electoral Commission himself, after announcing the winner, said, I really don't know who won. So it's very hard to say that this presidential election has legitimacy, although we don't know really who won.
Ambassador, if I could ask you an email question that came in from Michigan here in the US. Anne-Marie wrote in asking, do either of the parties take Secretary Rice seriously?
I think they do, because the United States genuinely cares about Kenya. Kenya is one of the most promising countries in Africa. Its economy, it's a powerhouse as an economy. And not only that, it has great prospects for the future, and it is very important for the entire East African region. Countries like Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Southern Sudan depend on the success of Kenya. If Kenya doesn't succeed economically, all of these surrounding countries will have great problems.
We have a call on the line from Germany. It's actually a Kenyan citizen by the name of Olwaya. Go ahead, please. Olwaya, go ahead.
Hello. I have a question to the Minister, Mr. Tangula.
Please.
Okay. Now we see Kenya is burning down, and everybody in the whole world knows that the elections were stolen. What is the government doing on their side? Because it looks like the opposition has gone down on their hard stance about calling for the resignation of the president and the others. What is the government side doing? Because it looks like they're still having their hard stance on the situation.
Okay, so let's Minister Wetangula, please.
You know, in the process of the Annan process, we have, as a government, put forward, and it's been agreed between parties, that we are going to set up an independent review committee that is going to audit and establish the truth about these elections, because the government believes that President Kibaki won fair and square. The opposition alleges that the election was stolen. We all want to know the truth, and that committee is going to work out on that. And today we did agree with the Kofi Annan team that we are going to formulate the terms of reference and look for credible, both local and international people to do that audit. Secondly, we have also, in the process of this mediation, agreed to set up a justice, truth, and reconciliation committee, that commission, in fact, that will look at all the issues relating to violence, circumstances surrounding the elections, the conduct of the ECK, and all this. Everybody wants to know the truth, including we in government, because we have an independent electoral commission that conducts elections, declares the results, and we shouldn't be vilified for results we didn't declare.
Okay. We have a call on the line from Paris. Juliana, what would you like to ask?
Yes, Mr. Riz Khan, good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, what I would really like to ask is the fact that, irrespective of Mr. Raila losing the election, yes, what I would like to ask...
Keep going, just ask your question, we can hear you.
Okay, because he said he wants the good of the people of Kenya. And I recall I was in Kenya at the time the election results were announced. And what he said was that if he does not win, there will be problems for Kenya. So how can a person who aspires to be a leader of a country and to lead East Africa utter such a statement, and yet he says he wants the good of the people?
Okay.
I think it's just all about selfishness.
Juliana, let me ask Professor Nyong'o, who's representing the ODM here. Juliana's question is really regarding the kind of a statement that was made by Mr. Odinga prior to the election result being announced. Was he sending out the wrong message?
Well, I don't know when Mr. Odinga made that statement, but that's a kind of statement that comes from somebody who was obviously biased in our mind. I think Mr. Odinga did say very clearly over and over again that we want a free and fair election. The ODM had been campaigning for 2 good years, and in the end won 199 seats in Parliament to PNU's 43. We have carried the majority of local authorities in the country, over 1,000 civic seats to PNU 300 and something. So the evidence is there to show that the ODM is a majority party in this country, and that if the truth be told, and the truth is always very difficult to accept by those people who know they're not telling the truth, that Mr. Odinga was actually elected the president of this country. But since the Electoral Commission decided to be responsible and misreport the results of the election, we are prepared to look forward by trying to see whether there's a remedy to our country so that we can move forward. But justice must be done in order for this country to go forward. And that will be done when all the facts are put on the table. And I'm quite sure that we shall be justified in the near future.
London on the line. Joe has a question. Joe, what would you like to ask?
Yes, I'd like to ask my question.
Please.
I'd like to ask my question to Professor Nyong'o.
Okay.
Professor Nyong'o, could you tell Kenyans who I believe are watching this program tonight, are you going to accept a deal that is not, which is not constitutionally acceptable to Kenyans today? Are you trying, as ODM, are you trying to say that we should throw out the constitution of Kenya and impose a decision which does not respect our rules of law?
Okay.
Thank you.
Professor.
You know, I hope the person asking that question is a Kenyan, because it is not for the generosity of the cow that we go to the butcher shop to buy meat. It is because we need to live by eating meat. It is not for the love of the Constitution that we must keep a bad Constitution. It's because we need good governance that we must do away with the Constitution, which has been a problem in this country since independence. And you know for certain that since 1992, there's been a struggle for constitutional reform in this country. We do not want the imperial presidency in this country. We would like to change that so that we can have democracy in the country. In 1992, President Moi had to change Section 2A of the Constitution to introduce multi-party democracy in this country. In 1997, President Moi accepted the IPPG resolution so that the Electoral Commission of Kenya can be shared among opposition parties represented in Parliament. He did not change the Constitution, but introduced a new democratic practice that has helped this country. I do not understand why the PNU is stuck on the legalism of Constitution, when they know pretty well that this country has been looking for a good democratic Constitution since '92. Okay. And if we could have accepted the Boma's draft Constitution, we would not be where we are today.
Well, so let's get a call in from Saudi Arabia. Suleiman, let's squeeze in your question quickly, please.
Hello, good afternoon to all.
Go ahead, hi.
Well, my question is to Mr. Wetangula.
Okay.
If President Kibaki won legally, why can't he just accept another election so that he wins with he will win also if he won legally, he will win also.
Okay.
Why
Minister Wetangula, what do you think? Is I mean, if he's confident, Mr. Kibaki is confident of his position as victor, could the election be reheld?
First of all, in every election, in many parts of the world and many countries, every time results are declared, there are disputes. If every time somebody contests your victory, you concede to go back to elections, countries will live in an electoral process forever. That is not a solution to the problem. We have mechanisms within our laws and constitution on how to resolve electoral disputes.
Okay.
That is water under the bridge because our colleagues elected not to take that route.
Let me get a quick question.
I don't want to preempt the discussions that we are going on with, and I'm sure we are going to solve the problem.
Minister, let me get a quick question into Ambassador Cohen here and ask, I mean, in looking at what's happened in Kenya, what we've been watching, how much long-term harm has been done to the stability of the country and the reputation as far as foreign investment?
I think for the time being, there is no long-term harm. I think most people have confidence in Kenya. It's a good place to do business. It's a good place to do tourism. And I think if they solve this problem quickly, and I believe the minister is quite correct to say that they're working on it, and I believe the United States and other countries will help with resettlement of refugees and internally displaced.
Right.
So I'm still quite optimistic.
All right, so thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us. And we thank you for being with us too. On tomorrow's show, we look at the US presidential race through the eyes of veteran candidate and independent politician Ralph Nader. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts or pressing issues that you'd like us to cover, send an email to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is next.
Da